I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm Shaun Haney. It's great to be with you here. Our very first show. Really looking forward to bringing you the week that was in Canadian agriculture. It is really great to be, for the first time, broadcasting on CKOM and CJME. This is really exciting stuff, and I'm looking forward to bringing you all of the RealAgriculture.com content to you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to it. So today on the show, and you picked a great week for us to start this show. I got to be honest with you. I was in Ottawa earlier this week for two different meetings, Crops Convention and the CFA meeting, and then finished the week in Orlando, Florida for Commodity Classic. Yes, the weather much better in Florida than it has been in Canada, and I'm not going to complain about that whatsoever. So we've got some great content here for you here today. So I'm going to be joined in a little bit by my colleague at RealAgriculture.com, Kara Oosterhuis. We've also got a fertilizer update with Josh Linville of StoneX. Of course, we've seen a bit of a pullback in that fertilizer market. Josh is going to give us a bit of a look forward. I've also got audio for you from the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Marie-Claude Bibeau, and the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, who both spoke at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture meeting earlier this week. Not many people can kind of give me a straight answer or a final answer, but it has been a very long time, like pre-1980, that a prime minister has actually spoke to farm delegates at a CFA meeting. So it was a pretty unique situation, and I was in the room. So I'll bring you some perspective on what he had to say about the fertilizer emission reduction. We'll also hear today from Dennis Laycraft. He's the Executive Vice President with the CCA, the Canadian Cattle Association. The U.S., basically USDA, I should say, put out a proposed rule on what is going to happen with this product of USA label going forward. There's going to be some changes, and it's going to bring up, I would say, some bad dreams and old memories when it comes to mandatory country of origin labeling. Potentially. Is it trade compliant? We'll find out from Dennis Laycraft here on RealAg on the Weekend. If you have any feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg listener line, 855-776-6147. Encourage you as well to make sure you check out realagriculture.com. Joining me right now, as I indicated, is Kara Oosterhuis of RealAgriculture. Kara, it's great to be with you here in Florida.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, talk about a lineup on a show today. That is, you have had a heck of a week, and there's some great people on here today.
Yeah, believe me, we have not been able to squeeze all the different stuff that we have grabbed this week because that's the meetings I've been at. Never mind some of the meetings like Atlee Hamlin, our Saskatchewan field correspondent. She has been at a couple different agronomy meetings this week as well. You've been with me here at Commodity Classic. Lindsay was with me in Ottawa. And I know Kelvin Hepner, who covers a lot of our political ag policy angles. He was also very busy this week. It was a very busy day, or busy week, I should say, on the Hill, covering all the different committee meetings that happened. So you've been out and about on the trade show floor here at Commodity Classic. Record attendance, 10,200 people attended this week in Florida. Don't blame them. The weather is beautiful outside. And what were some of your takeaways? What did you see on the trade show floor this year that really caught your eye?
You know, there are a ton of new combines, which is really interesting to see. And you know, I just finished up with Kurt Blades of AEM, and that's the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. And he said, you know, that numbers are up like 160% in the U.S. when it comes to people buying these combines. So it's a great time to actually have the combines out and stuff like that. But yeah, there's tons of people. And you know, it's kind of funny. I've run into a few farmers from Eastern Canada, and they're going, you know, I didn't actually intend to come to the show, but I'm here because I was here on vacation with my family. Now my family's laughing at me because they're saying, you're on vacation, you can't come to a farm show. But I mean, that I feel like that just sums up farmers to a T. You know, we go to the curling rink to get away from the farm, and we still talk about farming.
When you talked to Kurt Blades from AEM, did he provide any other indication on some of the Canadian numbers when it comes to machinery sales?
Yeah, so it sounds like combines were up. I don't know the exact percent on it, but combines were up in Canada. But as well, it was row crop tractors that were really spiking in Canada. So he didn't really have the why for that. These numbers are fresh. They're basically coming out this week, end of this week. So it's very fresh. He doesn't have the why, but he said it has a lot to do about when people buy things as well. And, it's the time of the year where a lot of U.S. people are going to be buying combines and a lot of Canadians are going to be looking at those planters.
Yeah, I would also think it'd be availability. One of the reasons that tractors and combines would be higher from a sales standpoint, I think, is because last year things were so short on supply. A lot of dealers had a hard time even getting inventory, which also led to the fact that the used market was so strong last year and actually continues to be this year if you look at some of the auction sales that have been out there. One of the other big pieces, Kara, that I've noticed this week is the farmers talking a little bit more concerned about with the direction of the commodity market and what it could mean for the back half of 2023. Profitability obviously still looks good in many of the crops that we would be growing, but I think there's some cause for concern going forward.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, they say this year in both the U.S. and Canada, they're saying this is one of the most high cost years that this crop is going into the ground. So, of course, there's concern everywhere because we go, okay, even if those commodity prices are still okay, they're maybe not what they were. And we need to get these profits back somehow. And I mean, you look across the prairies, like the drought we've had, even if we get some rain, we're making up for a few years here.
Yeah, that's been one of the really encouraging things through the first 3 months of the year here as we've been at all these conferences. Really, it's been a real traveling road show for everybody on the Real Agriculture team. The end of La Nina really creates the opportunity to end this real dry bias we've seen on the whole western half of the U.S. Of course, there's tons of snow in California. You see what's happening. Some of the pictures out of California are crazy. But places like Alberta could use some rain in the southern tip. Obviously, also in Saskatchewan. There's real concern in that southwestern corner of the province, the grassland condition. We could really use some rain to produce that crop, as you mentioned. It's definitely expensive when we think about what it's going to cost us to put in the ground. Quickly, you've done a bunch of different videos that we're going to be posting at realagriculture.com. They're going to be going up. Some really, really cool new innovations and products and things like that to discuss.
Yes, absolutely. And I think actually one of the really cool things I got to attend, and I'd never even heard of it before, maybe it's just ignorance, but Plugfest. So it's this whole thing where people come together, there's 20 different manufacturers, and they come and they test out their isobus solutions and they test out all their different equipment and they switch every half an hour, it sounds like. So you have somebody, they call it speed dating for isobus. So you switch every half an hour and you get together and basically it creates a standard for all these different equipment manufacturers to be sitting together and going, okay, does the red stuff work with the green stuff, and does the green stuff work with the blue stuff, and et cetera, and et cetera. So I thought that was a really cool. Apparently this happens twice a year. The second one is in France, I think, this year. So it's pretty cool that they go kind of across the world nationally, or well, not even nationally, globally like that.
Yeah, very, very cool. If you want to catch any of Kara's coverage from Commodity Classic, make sure you go to realagriculture.com. And like I said, it's been a busy week for us, so there's a lot of content going up on that site here over the weekend and into the early part of next week. Okay, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Josh Linville of StoneX, get caught up on what's going on in this fertilizer market. You're listening to the very first show of Real Ag on the Weekend.
Hey, I'm Kelvin Hepner, and I just wanted to give you a heads up about a new project that we are working on here at Real Agriculture together with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, or CAPI. A lot of what we do at Real Ag, in many ways, is simply connecting dots between different pieces of information, different people, experiences, eras, different parts of the country in some cases, and we connect these dots or make these connections in an attempt to create a clearer or more informed picture of our world when it comes to the big issues in farming, in ranching, food, agriculture. It's also the goal of a new agriculture policy-focused podcast that we are excited to launch together with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're calling it the Ag Policy Connection, And it's going to feature in-depth panel discussions about the policies and issues that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future. We're going to bring together the people that were in the meeting room, and as they sometimes say, in the meeting after the meeting. They had a hand in making those policies and making those big decisions. On each episode, we're going to talk about what led to a specific policy change, how it happened and came together, whether it has stood the test of time or needs to be changed as we look back and look ahead. For example, we're planning different episodes on the history of Canada's ag policy framework, the big federal-provincial agreement that governs most of what government does in agriculture. The end of the Canadian Wheat Board is also on the list. Trade deal negotiations, the nitty-gritty of the Canada-EU trade deal, for example, as well the decision to opt out of RBST hormone use in Canadian dairy and more. And of course, we always welcome ideas from you and your feedback along the way. So whether you're a fellow ag policy nerd or not, stay tuned. The first episodes of the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by RealAgriculture and the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. They'll be showing up here on RealAgriculture and in your podcast feed on your podcast player shortly.
One of the big discussions while I was down in the Commodity Classic in Orlando, Florida, as well at Crop Convention in Ottawa, as well as the CFA meeting this week, it has been a busy week, was talking about fertilizer prices. And we've seen definitely a pullback in prices. But I guess one of the big questions as we are about to put seed in the ground on the 23 crop is, where do we go from here as we look forward on fertilizer prices? To answer that, I ran into Josh Linville of StoneX. Him and I chatted at Commodity Classic. Here's the conversation. A lot of people talking about the fertilizer market, and a lot of the narrative is that things have kind of rolled over from the highs. Where do we go from here as you see the fertilizer market, Josh?
Well, it depends on the market. Everything today has a very, very bearish slant to it. When you look at the nitrogen market, prices have fallen significantly. Urea, as an example, is a third of what it was 12 months ago. You roll the clocks back to March, April, NOLA values were $900, $930 a ton. It looked like they're going higher. A lot of things have improved. Prices are down significantly. And it's starting to get a little bit of a slant that how much more can it really go down? And there's a lot of worries globally. And I know, hey, we want to know what's going on in our exact market, but we're a global market, whether we want to admit it or not. So we're watching European production. While their natural gas prices are down, production remains at 60-65%. That's less than normal. Chinese exports, they improved in December, but we don't know if that's going to be a year-long thing in 2023 or they'll scale back. And then Russia, they're a major exporter of every single product out there. If they continue to take steps into Ukraine and really anger the world, if we see stepped up sanctions, that is going to affect fertilizer next.
Yeah. But as we look at it, don't you think that there's more opportunity to go lower than go higher based on what we're hearing in the broader commodity market as well?
Yeah, today we saw corn markets down. We've been tracking that December 23 price significantly. We've been watching it every single second because that's the correlation to the nitrogen we're going to put on the field today. We're putting that nitrogen on this spring in order to raise the crop this fall. And that price has gone from, 2 weeks ago, $5.95. Today we're $5.50, $5.55. That's gone down quite a bit, and that's going to make the buyers even more reluctant to step forward. But then again, if we stay in the pattern we are, with nothing changes, if we get China back, if nothing happens to change Russia, if European production continues to pick up, the narrative is still bearish. But I would say any one of those situations, any one of those three get worse, it's a whole new marketplace.
You know, this past year, it made the people that waited to buy fertilizer for the 23 crop feeling better about themselves, the people that bought in the fall. Do we have any indication about 24? Like, could we see normal buying patterns return where it makes sense to buy July, August, September as opposed to what we saw this year, or just way too early to tell?
I'd say way too early to tell. We need to wait and see what a lot of the spring is. And people get frustrated. Why isn't the market willing to sell me fertilizer, physical fertilizer, beyond the spring season? Why can't we get beyond that? Well, a lot of the summertime is going to be dictated by how good or bad the spring season is. Last spring was a great example. It was a terrible spring, one of the worst anhydrous springs we've ever had. Well, that weighed on prices until the European situation popped up. So the market wants to see what's happening near term before it starts setting those futures prices. The paper markets are starting to break that stranglehold. We're seeing a little bit of stuff further out. And as far as where prices go, a lot of it, like I said, a lot of it's going to depend on these global prices. But I would still say we're tracking that relationship. I don't like trying to call just the high or just the low of the fertilizer. I like to look at the value of it. And we look at where fertilizer is today compared to where corn prices are. Yeah, corn's down quite a bit. But that relationship is still very, very good. And I understand we'd all rather have corn at $7, $8, $9 a bushel. But today's relationship actually looks fairly solid.
What are North American prices for nitrogen relative to other areas of the world? Are we more expensive, cheaper?
We've been about the same price. Take urea, for example. Most traded product out there, most produced product out there. Half of our product comes from the Arab Gulf, Persian Gulf, Middle East, whatever you want to call it. So we track that relationship and we watch to see where is their price, what is their freight, and where is our price, and look at that relationship. And we've been very almost even money to the rest of the world. Phosphate, we have been even to maybe even a little bit of a discount. Potash is all over the place, but we're well suited. Again, it's one of those things where you might have one country or two get out of sync from the rest of the world, but very quickly they're drawn back in. Right now, I'd say we're in line.
We've heard some North American producers like, say, Nutrien, which is no stranger to our Canadian audience and the rest of the world, obviously, as a global player. How much excess production have they brought online as they've been talking about doing?
Nitrogen, actually, I don't think it's going to be excess product. Actually, from our models, you have a very good idea of what new production looks like. It takes multiple years to build it, get it online. So we have a fairly good idea of what now through 2025 looks like from a production side. We also know kind of directionally where the demand is going to go. We actually see production versus demand getting smaller. There's going to be less excess supply. We think it gets tighter here in the next couple of years. Phosphate, potash. Phosphate, we continue to see some things ramp up. There's some promising things in Africa where you might see more production come online. You got to worry about the political side of it, but that's promising. Potash, there's more mines that are supposed to be being opened in Russia. There's mine in Canada that can be restarted again. So there are things that can certainly ramp up supplies and help keep pressure on that price.
Those changes to production, though, don't happen quickly. When we're talking about opening up mines, and of course, you just think about it in the G7, the permitting required to do that kind of stuff. This is not stuff that just happens at the snap of a finger.
Right. Yeah, I mean, talking about just the timeline of it, you've got to dig the hole. You got to get the process in place. It takes a very long time. Nitrogen is an engineering nightmare. And even once you get there, now you're all of a sudden dealing with a situation of you've got to get the plant going. It's high temperatures, it's high pressure, it's very hard on and wear and tear on the equipment, so stuff breaks all the time. It's not something that happens overnight. And that's why we look at these things in very long-term cycles. Yeah.
You always put together those commodity price to fertilizer ratio charts. Which crops right now look to be the worst in that regard and maybe the best?
I would say today, Kansas City wheat and the wheat markets in general have been very good. Canola has been phenomenal. That's something I readily admit I don't track it nearly as much. I'm a corn guy, so that's what I look at it quite a bit. And even corn looks pretty good. But we ran the canola versus urea. That was some of the best values that we have seen in the last 2.5 decades. We ran those numbers all the way back to 2020, or I'm sorry, the year 2000. There were two periods, and that was in 2018 and 2020, I believe, that they were a little bit below where we're at today. It is some of the best values we've seen in literally decades.
That's fascinating. I was going to, you follow up with the why, but there's no reason for it. It's just the way that it works out.
Yeah, it's just, you have the canola market showing a little bit of strength, fertilizer prices coming off. And that's where we sit there and say, listen, yeah, we need to be worried about the volatility and prices and long-term outlooks, but ultimately it's that relationship. And that's where we can sit there very quickly and pinpoint, regardless of if one's going up or one's going down, the relationship today is solid. It's time for layer. What's
the biggest difference between this time last year versus now when you look at the fertilizer markets?
Last year, look at all the issues we had. We were losing European production. We thought we had lost all Russian exports. Chinese government had shut down their export flow. We were losing major supplies, or so we thought, for a very, very long time. Supplies were extremely tight and demand was phenomenal because grain prices were very, very good. This year, there's hope that China's coming back. European production has picked up. We'd never lost Russia. In fact, it's kind of like, well, actually, some of them they've picked up again. So supplies are significantly better. And even more so, farmers spoke with their checkbooks and they sat there and said, we're not going to buy it. We're going to scale back. Phosphate potash application rates gone down significantly because they said, I can mine the soil. Why would I spend this high price? Nitrogen, I'm going to be a little more choosy. I'm going to be a little more spotty. You can start to see these, variable rate technologies. I'm going to go check the soil and say, I need it over here. I don't need it there. That reduces that demand.
Josh, thanks a lot for joining us here. Enjoy the rest of the Commodity Classic, and we'll chat with you again soon.
Can't wait.
That was Josh Linville of StoneX down at Commodity Classic in Orlando. You know, it's very interesting. One of the points that Josh makes that the nitrogen canola ratio is one of the best values of all the different crops that Josh did the comparison for. It'd be very interesting to see how long that continues. And were you able to take advantage of that? Send me your feedback, shaney@realagriculture.com. When we come back here on RealAg on the weekend, we're going to talk fertilizer emission reduction with Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister Bibeau right after this.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
And welcome back to RealAg on the weekend. You know, it was a busy week in Ottawa earlier this week. We had the Canadian Federation of Agriculture meeting. We had Crops Convention. And on Monday, as a part of that CFA meeting, Prime Minister Trudeau spoke to farmer delegates and industry people. And it was really interesting to be there. I was there in person. And the Prime Minister actually, I thought, fared quite well. I did kind of did a bit of an unofficial survey around the room, so to speak. And I'm not saying that I agreed with everything that he said. What I'm saying is that I think he fared quite well in the fact that he talked for about 10, 15 minutes and then did unfiltered, unvetted questions from the audience. Basically, if you had a question, you put your hand up and he would select people and he would do his best to answer questions. And I thought that he did better than maybe one would expect, and that seemed to be kind of what a lot of people in the room thought. What was the most interesting was the fact that he addressed head-on the fertilizer emission reduction. Okay, remember you know this potential policy really, really well. It's been something that's been talked about a lot throughout the winter, and the big concern has been that the government's going to try to reduce fertilizer emissions by 30% by mandating a reduction in your fertilizer use on your farm. And of course, that's the big pushback. We've heard Minister Bibeau say a lot, and not just in public, but also times that we have interviewed her at realagriculture.com, talk about how it is simply aspirational, it is voluntary. Well, the Prime Minister, in his speech, in like the first 2-3 minutes, tackled it head on. Here's what he had to say.
You guys are worried about climate change and a whole lot of other things. On top of that, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation you may be reading online that's adding to your worries. I was at a town hall in Langley, BC just last Thursday where Cade asked me why we were, quote, mandating a 30% reduction in fertilizer. I want to be as clear with you as I was with him. We are consulting with farmers in the industry about a voluntary, not mandatory, reduction in emissions from fertilizers, not in use of fertilizers. I've heard directly from you that finding ways to use fertilizer more efficiently is important, both for the sustainability and resilience of our environment and of your bottom lines. We're investing to help you adopt technologies and practices that are not just good for the environment, but also good for your bottom line. Our price on pollution is in place to reduce emissions and fight climate change. And it puts money back in Canadians' pockets, including farmers in places that use the federal system. That's why, for farmers specifically, we've exempted gasoline and diesel for farm use from pollution pricing. And for eligible farms in backstop jurisdictions, we've brought in tax credits for things like propane and natural gas use. In addition, Families that live in rural communities, like farm families, get a 10% top-up to their climate action incentive payments that come in 4 times a year. We've also provided funding to help farmers invest in clean technologies that reduce your energy costs, like helping farmers purchase more efficient grain dryers. But there's also an ongoing reality around high global inflation and interest rates that are hitting you all hard. Supply chain disruptions and Putin's illegal war have driven up the price of essential inputs. Most concerningly, global food prices went up when Russia weaponized food and prevented the export of grain that vulnerable countries were relying on. It was a cruelty on an unfathomable scale and was more evidence of just how essential farmers' contributions are. Canada is doing its part to support farmers in Ukraine, but we know this global situation is affecting Canadian farmers too. Simply put, farming is getting more expensive. Well, programs like the Advanced Payments Program provide low and interest-free loans so you can afford things like fuel, fertilizer, and seed. And I want to note that we raised the interest-free limit to $250,000 for last year and this year. I've heard your concerns, and our government is constantly looking at more ways we can keep being there for you. We offer generous programs, and we want to make sure that they're responding to the needs of smaller family farms and younger farmers as well. The previous government's track record on agriculture is one of budget cuts, but we believe in supporting you, not taking you for granted, and that's why we'll keep investing in agriculture.
That was Justin Trudeau speaking at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture meeting in Ottawa this week. And so what we heard there is, the fertilizer emission reduction will be aspirational. It will remain voluntary, as he mentioned. He talked about a lot of ways the government is trying to help you reduce your reliance on fertilizer. There's that. He also brought up the fact that the carbon tax, he loses me at the carbon tax and the fact that this is somehow helping. I know that many of you out there listening are saying, you know that this has just costed you a lot of money with not a lot of options to bypass those costs. We have seen some exemptions, and that's a good thing, but overall, the carbon tax not popular in farm country. I don't care what province you're in. If you're interested in listening to the entire speech and Q&A, and I encourage you to do that, whether you are a fan of the Prime Minister or not, it's always good to hear. This does not happen very often, okay? We do not have a lot of Prime Ministers speaking directly to a farm audience like this one. So I encourage you to go to realagriculture.com, and we have the entire speech up on our website. Also, the next day, I actually had a chance to go to the office of the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Marie-Claude Bibeau. I asked Minister Bibeau about the What We Heard document. This was the feedback from the industry on some of the impacts, positive and negative, when it comes to people's thoughts on the fertilizer emission reduction. That's where we started. Here's what she had to say on the timing of that report.
I think there's still a few months to work on, but this report will also serve in our process to put in place the sustainable agricultural strategy. This will be a big part of it. So this strategy is, of course, focusing significantly on sustainable agriculture, on the talking about the environment, but it also includes the two other elements. So environment, yes, but also the economy. So making sure that our producers can be not only sustainable environmentally, but also economically. So we want our farmers to thrive.
That was the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Marie-Claude Bibeau, speaking to me in her office earlier this week. I've been saying for months, that the government's been looking for an exit ramp out of this policy. Originally, I think there was great intention to put together probably pretty strict rules around fertilizer use and trying to reduce fertilizer emissions. The further the government got into the situation, the more they realized and were being told by people inside the industry and out, this was going to create great unintended consequences. They have been looking for an exit ramp. Now we're going to see some of these ideas, I guess, rolled into the sustainable ag strategy that they're currently consulting on with 20 plus groups. But the industry is in a much better situation today on this potential policy than they were, say, a year to 18 months ago. It very much seems like the exit ramp is there. They are taking it. And that's a good thing for your farm and many of your neighbors. We'll be right back on Real Ag on the Weekend right after this.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
And welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. You know, one of the big trade issues of the week was definitely the USDA and their proposed rule on product of the USA label. And this is going to bring back a lot of memories of mandatory country of origin labeling. I had a chance to catch up with Dennis Laycraft of the Canadian Cattle Association to discuss how Canada will move forward against the proposed rule. Okay, Dennis, a lot of concern in Canada right now. We heard about this USDA proposed rule on product of the USA labeling. Give us an update on where CCA is at in trying to understand what are some of the potential ramifications of this proposed rule.
And maybe to start with the rule itself, it's got most of the language that was in the mandatory rule, but they've actually expanded it to include processed product. Now, it is being brought forward as a voluntary proposal, but of course, you can have, proposals like this and regulations put in place that actually become a normal practice that everyone follows, and you get into effectively a de facto mandatory when that happens. So, we're monitoring it closely. We're working with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, North American Meat Institute, who share our concerns about what's being proposed here.
Yeah, so essentially, based on the way this proposed rule reads, an animal is brought off grass out of Montana. Just as an example, a grass animal is brought into the feedlot alley in southern Alberta. It is fed to slaughter weight and then shipped down for slaughter in the U.S. That could no longer have a product of USA label as it does today.
No, that's obviously one of the challenges. It's got a born, raised, slaughtered, and processed in the definition, and with the amount of two-way trade that occurs, particularly in feeder cattle, it's going to lead to more segregation, which was what was the real problem with the previous rule in place, and you started to see animals get discounted. But it's interesting, the USDA's own analysis of the previous MCO rule estimated that over 10 years, there was very little consumer benefit, but it was going to cost the U.S. industry $8.09 billion. So that's the comments that NCBA and others are making down there, that this was a failed policy from the past, and bringing it back is not going to make it any better.
Yeah. So what is retaliation then in the cards, Dennis? Or once again, this is only a proposed rule. It's not the final rule. So we can't, my understanding is we wouldn't expect any retaliation until that final rule was be put in place.
Yeah, no, there has to be a final rule in place, and then you have to do your assessment based on that, whether that is actually leading to the same level of segregation and discrimination that the previous rule was found in violation. So we certainly have maintained the retaliation rights, but that is, that's an analysis that has to be done after the rule is finally put into effect.
Yeah, and one of the things I've heard, Dennis, from some of our listeners in the U.S. on RealAg Radio is, well, Canada has MCOOL, so why shouldn't we? The product of Canada or made in Canada labels, are we? Is there a conflict here, wanting one thing but not the other?
Yeah, there is a difference. Our product of Canada is actually a guideline, so we are able to go in without having to change a regulation from time to time to make sure it actually is fitting with what is the commercial practices that are taking place. And, I'll give one example. Almost all of the cattle we import into Canada from the U.S. are breeding or feeder cattle. So we're able to work out, and, we would have preferred that it just went to slaughter conveying origin, which is kind of the normal international method of determining the product, but we were able to come up with an accommodation so that those cattle could be brought in and not be unfairly discriminated against or require additional segregation. So, we found a workaround that we could because it was a guideline, and, we want to make sure that the ability to move cattle between Canada and the U.S., and which is where all of our cattle will move, can be done in a way that doesn't lead to discrimination or segregation. It's just better for the North American market when we have it operating efficiently. So.
No, originally the push for this change on the Product USA label, my understanding was it was to prevent basically packaged or boxed beef coming out of, say, South America, changing the packaging, and then slapping a Product of USA label on it. And it seems like there's some unintended consequences here where Canada, who that is not a concern, at least from certain groups, it's been caught in the prop wash here.
And that's kind of our understanding as well, that there was some product that came in, and that's a very, very isolated. There's not very much that product comes in to begin with, and certainly that could have been addressed more surgically. And, that gets into the substantial transformation conversation, not the born, raised, slaughtered, and processed conversation, which just suddenly has taken on the life of.
Is there an opportunity for a carve-out, you think, Dennis, where basically maybe an exemption or a compromise here for, say, Canada and Mexico, who are members of the USMCA?
I think there's a whole range of conversations that are going to take place as we provide comments into rulemaking. So I think it's too early to sort of gauge where it's likely to go. But I know, the government of Canada has come out with strong comments concerned about this, and we are preparing comments as well. And, we'll look at a range of potential options to hopefully get something that doesn't take us back to where you start to have animals discounted for really no good reason. So,
being in the U.S. this week, there definitely was a lot of questions pointed my direction from a lot of my media colleagues in the media lounge here at Commodity Classic, asking, how is Canada going to go about this? Because a lot of Americans are hearing about the fact that Canada has its own country of origin labeling. But as Dennis chatted about there, one of the factors there is the fact that it is simply a guideline. It is a way of possibly labeling. There's no sort of legislation or rules attached to it, and there's some flexibility built in. One of the big concerns, as Dennis outlined, is the fact that slaughter does not designate origin, in this case of the Product of USA label. So we're going to hear a lot of groups, NCBA, the NAMI organization that represents packers in the United States, really talking about the fact that this creates a lot of concerns for the integrated value chain, as Dennis chatted about. There are many examples you can come up with where this is going to potentially cause a problem. And it's not just how a rule reads, okay? What I've also learned a lot here in talking to people about this is how a rule is implemented is actually a bigger cause for concern. This label, or the proposed rule, I should say, really talks about being voluntary. but voluntary can really mean mandatory if implemented in a certain manner. So we'll be following this very, very closely as the weeks progress. We couldn't get to everything here, of course, on our first show of RealAg on the weekend, but encourage you to go to RealAgriculture.com and make sure you get caught up on all things agriculture. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg listener line, 855-776-6147. Thanks for listening to RealAg on the weekend, and we'll chat again soon. Cheers, everybody.